I want to talk about the 5 bodies. I read something many years ago called Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, and it's written by a mystic called Geoff. Interestingly, that this amazing man started out as a self-defense instructor, but he had this intrinsic belief that we should never follow anybody else's maps, and we shouldn't follow our own maps for too long either. We should continually change them. We should challenge the social mores. We should never take yes for an answer. And he did an analogy which I later realised came from Hinduism, but he basically talked about he talked about the hierarchy of the body and about the 5 bodies, and he used the analogy of a chariot. And he said, if you imagine a chariot, he said a chariot's got 5 bodies. It's got a driver, which is the egoic body. It's got the horses, which is the sensual body. It's got the chariot itself, which is the physical body. It's got the passenger, which is the soul body. And he said, and then you've got the wheels, which represent religion or irreligion. So if the wheels are true, if they're balanced, then we have a comfortable and a direct passage. And the energy that comes through that chariot is what they call chi or prana or ki. And he talked about the fact that there needed to be a hierarchy. He said if the horses weren't trained, they would, and that's the sensual body, they just keep pulling you off the road. If the physical body wasn't maintained, you're not going to get anywhere because it's going to completely fall apart. If the wheels aren't aligned, you're going to keep losing wheels. You're going to keep stopping and starting and not get anywhere. If the driver at the front is drunk, then we're not going to be able to pass instructions on to him. And again, we're going to go all over the place. And if the passenger isn't the actual soul, if the passenger is just the latest trend or the latest dogma, then we're going to be going in the wrong direction for us. The reins that the driver holds represent the mind or the mind body. So the hierarchy is, we've got the soul in the back, which directs intuitively. We've got the driver, which is the egoic body or the egoic sentinel voice, which holds the reins, which is the mind. So that is sovereign over the mind, and the mind is sovereign over the sensual body and the physical body and this religion and irreligion. And he talked about the fact that if we haven't got those in alignment, and if we haven't got a communication between those 5 different bodies, then we're not really ever going to evolve. We're just going to go 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So we talked about a lot about the fact that with most people, the guy in the driver's seat, the guy actually directing where we should be going, the passenger, which represents the soul, isn't even there. It doesn't even exist for most people. It's there, but it's not recognised. They're not awake if they don't see it. So most people are always working between the physical, the sensual body and the mind, which is always looking for instant gratification. It's always looking for get-rich-quick schemes. It's always looking for sensual delights coming through the 5 different senses. So they need to be controlled. And basically their theory is, and this has been very true of my life, if you haven't got control of the sensual body and if you haven't got control of the mind, you're never going to elevate spiritually, because they're chaotic. The mind, we think that when we think of our mind, the thinking self, we think that's who we are. But that's just one of the tools of the soul. We think that we're the physical body, but the physical body dies. So we're not the physical body. And you see sometimes when people are paraplegic and they're very fully functioning in their mind and their brain, but their body's not working. So we know they're not the body. And people think that they are the sensual body. They think that they're eating, drinking, fighting, fucking, feeding body. That they think that's what they are, and they're led by that. Most people are led by the sensual body, but that's not who you are. Who you are is this self, this authentic self, or this soul at the very back that is observing. In Hinduism they call this the looker, or it's also known as the silent witness, or it's known as the observer or the soul, or in Freudism it would probably be called the id. It's the part that's connected to everything, and this is the part that needs to be awakened. This is what they call Krishna consciousness, Christ consciousness, universal consciousness, epiphany, clarity. Geoff said it was about being awake. Most people are asleep. They're not even aware that exists. They're not even aware of the 5 different bodies. They're not aware that there needs to be a hierarchy with the five bodies, so that the sensual body can't lead your life. If the sensual body leads your life, you're just going to go around a fishbowl. You're never really going to achieve, everything you do isn't going to satiate you, and we're going to end up in all the wrong places. When I was led by my sensual body, which was directed by my mind and back and forward, I was into violence, I was into sexual porn, I was into aggression, I was into ignorance, I was into limiting beliefs. My life was very, very limited. My awareness was very narrow. I remember a time I didn't even know. I used to think crime was okay. I could justify crime. I could justify stealing. I used to be a bodyguard for the kiters. I could justify that. I used to justify the violence. It was okay to be violent. I actually wrote at the beginning of Watch My Back, violence is the only way to overcome greater violence. I can't believe how little I knew. That's because I was led by my sensual body. I was led by my mind, which had very limiting core beliefs. So the hierarchy, again, if we think of it like a factory, we've got the CEO. He knows the broader picture. He knows where they want to go with the business. He knows where to take that. He's basically serving everybody else, but he's the one that's bringing the instructions downwards. So the CEO talks to the manager talks to the foreman talks to the workers, and between them they create the product. So we've got the authentic self, we've got the egoic sentinel voice, which is the voice you're hearing now, then we've got the reins, which is the mind body, then we've got the horses, which is the sensual body, then we've got the chariot, which is the physical body, then we have the wheels, which are religion or irreligion. We're either aligned or we're not. That's where the hierarchy is. There's a great exercise that the Maharishi Ramana used to do, very, very simple. Because there's lots of meditations and people talk a lot about meditation, but basically all he did was he would say in his meditation, who am I? Who am I? Then he might say, if you wanted to add to that, who is the I that's asking, who am I? Who is the I that's asking? The I that's asking is the egoic sentinel voice. And then you can hear in the background somebody's thinking. There's a voice going in the background. If you listen and you observe, who is the I that's thinking? Who is the mind that's thinking? That's the mind body. Then of course you touch the physical body. Who is the physical body? Then you think about the sensual body. I nearly said sexual body because it's very linked to sex, but then you think about the sensual body, the part that wants to eat too much, drink too much, see too much, the part that wants to gorge, the part that's looking for fast track money, the part that's looking for wealth without work, for knowledge without apprenticeship. We look at that part of the sensual body. Who is the sensual body? Who is the sensual body? Then you ask yourself, who is observing? Who is the observer? And then go quiet and listen. Who is the observer? And then you ask, who is observing all? When you start doing this exercise, you start to separate the body. You start to separate the five bodies. I recognise very clearly that in my early 20s and early 30s I was led by the sensual body, and that was very connected to the mind that rationalised all the excesses. So I recognised the sensual body as being separate. It had a separate voice. The physical body I recognise as being mute. It's beautiful, but it's just a vehicle. I recognise that, I can see that. It does nothing without instruction from the mind. I recognise the mind very clearly because the mind is talking all the time. And if I listen, if I'm just out and about and I just observe myself, I observe my mind talking, chattering. If he says this, I'll do that. If he does this, I'll go there. And if she says that, and if I do this, and why did they say that, and why did she think that, and why aren't I making any money, and why doesn't anybody like me, or all of these voices going on in the background. That's the mind body, but it's the mind body that's not really controlled. But who's observing the mind body? When you start observing the mind body, you recognise that the observer, the silent observer, the silent witness is who you really are, and it's silent. It gives instruction to the sentinel self, to the egoic self, and then the egoic self follows the instruction through the mind, follows the instruction to the sensual body through the horses, and then keeps the body in good shape, because it's got to take us hopefully through maybe 90 or 100 years. So just the basic exercise, if you meditate, is you get quiet, is just to say, who am I? Ramana Maharishi found himself just by asking that one question. If you don't, the thing I've learned, the thing I know, Hinduism talks a lot about this. It's good to look at Hinduism if you get a chance, but Hinduism talks a lot about this. It says you think that you can evolve while you haven't got control of the physical and sensual body. If you think you can evolve while you haven't got control of the mind and the sensual body, if the mind and the sensual body are still getting you to do things that are falling outside of righteousness, then you're not ever going to evolve above that. If you can't control the mundane, if you can't control the vehicle, don't be looking at doing Le Mans, don't be looking at doing Formula One. You know, if we're going to evolve spiritually, we first of all have to get control of the physical, the sensual and the mind body. And to do that, we have to first recognize that they exist. So that's just an exercise to do. Who am I? Who is thinking? Who is the I that's thinking? Who is the I that's asking the question? Who is this physical body? Somebody asked me that at a book signing once. It was really interesting. He came in, he sat down, he was drunk, and I'd done a talk, and he suddenly said, who are you? Who are you? It was quite challenging, and it took me by surprise, and I looked over and I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm fucking asking you, who are you? And I thought about it. This was a long time ago. I didn't know who I was. I said, I'm Geoff Thompson. But as I said it, I felt my voice fall away, and I felt this rush of terror. He wasn't a physical threat, this guy, because he was drunk, and I can have a fight. I wasn't worried about that. It was the fact that he asked me a question I didn't know the answer. And as my voice fell away, I felt it fall away. I walked through the crowd, which disappeared. This crowd completely disappeared. It was just like me and this guy in the room. And he was sat on the step. I knelt down by him, and I put my hands on his face, and I said, what's wrong? And he was terrified, because he just walked into the whole universe, because he was introduced to my authentic self. And he said, nothing's wrong with me. And I kissed him, and I said, then be quiet. And I walked away. And that was it. That was my introduction, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, to my authentic self. And I've never forgotten that. And then later on I started reading about Ramana Maharishi and his technique of who am I, and thinking, well, I found that organically. So it's a good thing to ask yourself and to recognize that there are 5 bodies. You've got the authentic self, which is the observer. You've got the egoic self, which is the sentinel voice. It needs to be a sentinel voice that says, this is where we're going to go, this is what we're going to do. I'm the manager, I'm in charge. That translates through the mind body, which is the reins, which is master over the sensual body. In order to get this to work, we need to make sure that the 5 bodies are talking the same language. We need to introduce ourselves to the authentic self, and we need to recognize that the 5 bodies, they need a hierarchy. We need a CEO, we need a manager, we need a foreman, and we need workers, and we need to work as one cohesive unit. We need to recognize that. We need to recognize that and not be in denial that our sensual body is running us onto the internet to look at sexual porn, or our sensual body is making us overeat, or our sensual body and our undisciplined mind is making us judge people. You only have to go and look at your own profile. Go back and read your own profile on social pages, and you'll find out, most of the time, you'll find out who you're not. Because normally when people work through social media, we get a lot, and this is not a judgment, I've done it myself. I've often written stuff and thought, who the fuck wrote that? That was just an egoic voice bragging about how much I know, you know. So I'll include myself in this. You go and have a look at what you've written, you'll see who you are, and you'll see who you're not. And some people obviously are hideous, so we get a good idea of who they are when they do that, or specifically who they're not. So it's finding out by observing yourself every day. Observe yourself at work, you know. Are you doing things at work that you wouldn't do in front of your wife? Or are you doing things at work that you wouldn't do in front of your husband? You know, are you doing things that you wouldn't want to, you know, are you doing things in your life that you wouldn't want to see in the newspaper tomorrow? start asking yourself, doing this kind of very honest inventory, and start finding out who's in charge. And you'll once you get that hierarchy, once you recognize that the mind needs to be disciplined, and the disciplined mind needs to discipline the physical and sensual body. Once you've got this hierarchy in place, you can really start to do stuff. But until we get those two things in place, we're never going to rise above, we're never going to rise spiritually, we're never going to really get to any level. In fact, it's almost as though this kind of angelic tuition, or this intuition, doesn't actually physically exist until we get those things in place. It's a bit like building a tower block. You're not going to start laying bricks if you haven't dug a big hole and got a massive foundation. We need to bed ourselves very deeply before we start building infrastructure and before we start putting furniture in. So foundation is important, and foundation is the hierarchical 5 bodies. And again, just go into meditation, go into yoga, and you'll start just doing yoga, just doing meditation, just doing non-dogmatic prayer. Will automatically start to connect the 5 bodies, and you'll start to hear or feel intuitive voices, and you'll start to find reasons to discipline the physical and sensual body. The great thing about this is that the sensual body thinks it's in charge, but it shouldn't be. And the mind body thinks it's in charge, it thinks that's who you are, but it shouldn't be. And the egoic body thinks it's in charge, but it shouldn't be. Or it thinks it's negotiating between all the other bodies, but actually it should be the central voice, and they should all be under the instruction of the authentic self, which takes the information straight from the super soul, or straight from the universal mind. So we need to recognize who we are and recognize who we're not, and we also need to convince the workers, we need to convince the foreman, we need to convince the manager, we need to convince the physical body that it is in their best needs, it's in their best interests to be in alignment and to be disciplined. We need to do that. If we can't convince the sensual body that it will get everything it wants and more by connecting to the super soul, or connecting by getting a religion, or an alignment, then we're never going to do it. The sensual body and the mind body needs to have a very, very good reason to give up its autonomy. If you don't give it a good reason to give up its autonomy, then it's always going to rebel, and it probably will try and rebel anyway. So what I find is, if you start connecting through meditation, start reading some of the very good religious books, you'll get a really good idea of what you have access to. At the moment, most people are settling for scraps off the beach when they've got the whole fucking universe open to them, and they don't want to give up those little scraps because they don't recognize that there is an abundance out there waiting for them. So they feel as though these little sensual scraps are everything. So we have to convince those parts of ourselves that what they're settling for is peanuts. They have the whole universe open to them. And that's a process that comes from searching, that comes from asking. But again, I know I'm going off and I'm talking about lots of stuff, but if we come back to the center and just remember, in your meditation, just ask, who am I? Who is the what? Who is the I? That's asking. Who is the sensual body? Who is the physical body? Who is observing? Who is the observer? And who is observing all? When you realize, when you start doing this, when you start asking these questions, you start feeling the separate bodies separate. You start to feel them separate. When you ask the question, you feel them as separate bodies that need to be in alignment. You also recognize that when you ask who is observing, you become very aware of who's observing. And when you ask who's observing all, you recognize that this chariot, which is the 5 bodies, is going through time and space, and time and space is outside the body, outside the chariot, it's inside the chariot. It's outside of you, it's inside of you. So it's outside of you, but it's inside of you. So it's not you, but it is you. It's starting to sound really complicated, isn't it? So what you start to recognize is that you are everything. Everything is you. We are attached to everything. All the things we're grasping for, all the things we want, are already there. They're already ours. We just need to have an alignment. We need to have an infrastructure so we can access them. So you're inside the chariot, you're outside the chariot. You are the driver, you are the passenger, you are the reins, you are the horses, you are the wheels, you are time and space, you are everything, you are connected to everything, you are intrinsically everything. You can't not be everything. That's really exciting, because it's kind of saying, fucking hell, everything I want is already there. I just need to make sure the infrastructure's in place, the alignment's in place, the hierarchy's in place, so that we can get everything we want. And if that does sound too complicated, please forgive me. It's trying to find a simple analogy to explain it, but if that does sound complicated, just practice the exercise, who am I? It's no deeper than that. Just ask, who am I?